Tech investors get more worried about China. Could the falling yuan and stock sell-off just be the tip of the iceberg? I'm Emily Chang, and this is Bloomberg West. Coming up, Comcast and NBC reach for a younger audience with BuzzFeed. Plus, social media is ripping up the presidential election playbook. And how to hack and customize your Amazon Dash button. All of that ahead on Bloomberg West. First to our lead, turmoil returns to Chinese markets. The Shanghai Composite Index taking a dive overnight with top Chinese investors dumping stocks. Take a look at the chart. Over 6% wiped off the index by the end of the session. The tech-heavy Shenzhen Index faring even worse, ending the day close to 7% down, adding more drama to what's been a rocky summer. So, how much further will stocks fall? How worried should tech investors be? Beyond China, how will global tech be impacted? I'm joined now by Auerbach Grayson, head of Asian equities, Simon Mail, Bloomberg Intelligence chief U.S. economist Carl Riccadonna. So, Carl, I want to start with you because more broadly, we've been talking a lot about Chinese tech companies like Alibaba, like Tencent. But what about global tech companies that have exposure in China? How worried should they be?
Well, they have to be worried because the real question is how far the currency is going to be moving. And what you really need to evaluate here is whether it's their cost basis or their predominant sales market. Producers who are domiciled in mainland China are going to be much more competitive on the global market. So that could actually be good news for them. And that's a key reason why China is allowing the currency to fall, is to stimulate the export sector. On the other hand, both tech companies and also other mainline companies who are doing business in China are now going to face smaller corporate profits and reduced revenues as the ability for the Chinese to afford these international products is going to be marginalized.
It's interesting, Simon, because companies like Facebook, Google, Twitter, they're not even in China, right? Because the Chinese government has basically locked them out. But what about these other companies that we're talking about here?
Well, it's enormously important for Apple, and I think it's enormously important for Qualcomm as well. If you look at Apple, China is about 27% of their revenue. It's about 60% of the revenue growth. The devaluation of the renminbi that we've seen so far, about 3%. Given that the iPhones that Apple is selling in China are priced in renminbi, is going to reduce Apple's revenue in dollar terms per iPhone by about $30. How does Apple compensate? It either has to raise the price of those iPhones, which is going to be very, very difficult to do, given that they're already right at the top of the market and is facing incredibly stiff competition from an emerging Chinese handset industry, or the business becomes less profitable for them. That's a problem for Apple. The additional problem you have is that the Chinese economy is slowing. We're already in a bad period for luxury consumption. Apple's phones in China are selling between $900 and $1,200. These are luxury products. And I think as Apple needs to penetrate more and more price-sensitive markets within China, they're going to have a problem selling those expensive phones. So far, they've been selling well in Beijing and Shanghai, but Beijing and Shanghai are not China in the same way that New York and LA are not the U.S.
China already accounts for more than a quarter of Apple's revenue, at least as far as June goes. Let's talk, Carl, about what it could mean for longer-term demand. I mean, the iPhone is already like $300 more expensive in China for Chinese consumers. You have the smartphone market saturating there. With what's going on in the broader economy, could that kill demand, consumer demand for iPhones in China?
Sure. Well, it really depends on two things. So, number one, how the Chinese economy performs, and there are certainly big question marks there with the moves in the equity markets. Equity markets tend to be forward-looking, although the Chinese equity market is manipulated to some degree with such big government intervention. And the second factor is going to be how far this devaluation actually runs. So, a lot of folks are saying, well, China is just moving towards a more openly traded currency. They want to become a reserve currency. And the other camp says, well, maybe they're devaluing to stimulate the export sector. I tend to fall in that latter camp. And if that's the case, then the 3 or 4% move in the yuan in year-on-year terms is not going to be enough to jumpstart the economy. If China wants to be competitive with these other economies.
How low, Carl, do you think the yuan can fall? How much further will it fall?
That's exactly my point. So if China wants to be competitive in the U.S., look at the other major U.S. trading partners. The Mexican pesos moved by about 25%, euro 20%, Canadian dollar 20%, Japanese yen about 20%. China's only moved 4%. So I think there's tremendous scope for the yuan to move further if they really are pursuing a export stimulus strategy here with the devaluation.
So you think it could fall 20 to 25% more?
Well, I'm not an FX strategist, so I'll avoid from making an explicit forecast. But if China wants to return back to the same level of competitiveness in the U.S. with these other major trading partners, it would require about a 20% move.
If that happens, Simon, how worried are you?
Oh, if that happened, I would be enormously worried. I just don't believe that's going to happen. I think you might see a few percentage points down from here for the renminbi, but actually I would view this development as a long-term positive for the renminbi. The motivation behind China's move to a more flexible exchange rate policy is so to elevate the renminbi to global reserve currency status. If that happens in the long run, you will see a big increase in demand for renminbi and renminbi assets. So in the long run, I can actually see a case for appreciation.
What about in the short run for the markets? How much further do you think stocks will fall, Simon?
Well, the stock market, as I've always said, is a lottery in China. The stock market is not the economy, and the economy is not the stock market. Broadly speaking, there are still many companies in China that are trading way beyond any kind of measure of fundamentals. And even those fundamentals are somewhat vague in China because there's just not the degree of analysis of companies and the sophistication of analysis of companies to really be confident in those earnings. At the same time, there's some quite interesting value stories starting to appear in China in some of the sectors that have been subject to less speculative pressure. If you look at some of the banks, the properties, some of the cyclicals, there are some interesting value ideas there.
All right, Auerbach, Grayson, head of Asian equities, Simon Mail, Bloomberg Intelligence chief U.S. economist, Carl Riccadonna. We're going to keep our eye on China. We'll be looking at where the markets open today. Thank you guys so much for joining us. Well, Amazon's Dash button don't just help you order things. They can also collect and organize data. With a little programming skill, CloudStitch CTO Ted Benson turned his Huggies Dash button into a system to log information about his baby. The hack is pretty simple. Each Dash button is made up of a Wi-Fi radio and a battery. When you press the button, it connects to your Wi-Fi network. Benson logged each time the button connected to Wi-Fi by linking it to a Google spreadsheet. While he's using the hack to log his baby's dirty diapers, Benson says connecting to the button's Wi-Fi could allow users to do almost anything. Amazon unveiled its Dash button in March of this year. The device costs just $5. Coming up, BuzzFeed gets an investment from 30 Rock. Are more partnerships in store for media companies? And how the Pentagon is drastically expanding its drone program. And as we head to break, being chased down by robots may be a closer reality than you think. Check out this footage of Boston Dynamics' Atlas humanoid robot taking a test run through a forest. Now to a story we are watching. SoftBank increased its stake in Sprint for a second time this month, acquiring an additional $73 million in stock. The purchase comes on the tail end of an $87 million investment that was announced last week. The acquisition raises SoftBank's stake to slightly more than 80%. Sprint stock rose more than 4% today and is up 37% this month. SoftBank sees Sprint's turnaround efforts taking 2 years. Coming off of last week's dismal media earnings, Comcast, NBC Universal invested $200 million in BuzzFeed. The deal gives the website a valuation of $1.5 billion. Last week, NBC Universal invested the same amount in Vox Media. But what does the trend mean for the future of digital media companies? Here with me, Brad Hunstable, CEO of Ustream, and Keith Clinkscales in New York, CEO of Revolt Media. Keith, $200 million is a lot of money. I really hope BuzzFeed can keep it up. Do you think they can?
BuzzFeed has been innovators in bringing content, digital content to the world, and it's really the new way that things are going to operate. I think NBC was exceedingly smart in making this type of investment because this is the future for the way you reach millennials. You have to have the ability to talk to them in the language that they're working in now.
It's interesting, Brad, because you see BuzzFeed not just forming partnerships with NBC, but also Yahoo and Apple. It's like partnerships are the new media because everyone is just trying to figure out how to get people to watch their stuff or see their stuff, right?
Well, I think what the realities of it are, a lot of these platforms like Facebook or even increasingly like Snapchat, they have already aggregated big audiences. And so very smartly, a lot of these new media, new wave, media companies are integrating and doing these partnerships because they can tap into that distribution very quickly for their customers.
So, Keith, who gets the better end of the deal here? Is it NBC or is it BuzzFeed?
I think it's good for both. It's the rare opportunity where it's great for both. For BuzzFeed and for Vox, they get a great valuation. They get to work with a traditional old media player. For NBC, they get to be nimble. And they get to be nimble during a time where the media business is changing so rapidly, you have to find ways to innovate. So I think it works great for both of them.
What is BuzzFeed, though, really, Brad? What do they really get? The Olympics? I mean, do people care that much? It only happens once every couple of years.
Well, right now, they have a lot of funny videos and animal videos and a lot of news stories. But what they get is they get data. I mean, that's just the realities. And a lot of these new wave media companies understand how to use data to understand what their viewership is doing, much more than the traditional media companies have done in the past. And companies like mine, like Ustream, there's a reason these companies are looking at them as experts in this field. They're able to use the data and the analytics to drive monetization and to increase their viewership.
Now, Comcast is also looking into launching a major online video platform, something that would compete with what Verizon seems to be working on. What can you tell us about this?
From what I've read, I only know what I've read, is it's sort of a mix between what Verizon's working on, even a little mix of what YouTube is doing. It's called Watchables, I believe is the name of it. And I think a lot of these new media companies are going to be a part of that as well. But it's this attempt and this smashing of what's been old and what's new coming together, and everyone's, like you said, still trying to figure it out.
So, Keith, where do you see this going? A future of partnerships? Is that what we're looking at?
I think Brad was absolutely right, somewhat prescient. The reality of data, being able to put massive amounts of data together and be able to deliver that types of data to advertisers to let them know the audience that they're reaching is the future. That's the biggest challenge that media is having right now with Nielsen and declining ratings. When you're using things through the digital realm, you're able to precisely target who you're reaching and to deliver that audience behavior, that audience consumption pattern back. This is the future of where advertising is going. This is the future of media.
What about the future of where live video is going, Brad? Obviously, there's a thing called Periscope. It certainly gets a lot of buzz, but it hasn't really taken off just yet in the mainstream. You've got these two French media veterans who are trying to create a live video competition to Netflix, or a live video version of Netflix. Where is all this going?
Well, look, we're still in the first inning of video in general. I mean, the realities of it are video is exploding, whether it's live or video on demand. I mean, if you look at some of the Cisco data, by 2017, something like 85% of all the internet's data traffic is going to be video. And so whether it's live or video on demand, we're still in the early innings of this process.
But do you see live becoming a big thing?
Absolutely.
Why is it taking so long for Periscope to take off then?
Well, look, I think they put up some numbers this week that I thought were pretty impressive, actually, for a company that hadn't been around and recently launched.
Hard to judge those numbers, though.
Hard to judge the numbers, and we've done more live stream than anyone, and so the realities are the entire industry is growing. Okay. I mean, the live is a different medium. It has a different interactivity scope. It has a different way you sort of watch the videos, and so it is a different thing, but it's equally as powerful and in a lot of ways more emotional.
All right. Well, you know how I feel about live video. I think it's pretty important. Ustream CEO Brad Hunstable, thanks so much for joining us, as well as Keith Clinkscales, CEO of Revolt Media there in New York. Well, in drone news, the Pentagon is planning to ramp up drone usage by 50% over the next decade. According to officials, the move will greatly expand surveillance and intelligence collection in areas including Ukraine, Iraq, Syria, the South China Sea, and North Africa. In addition to surveillance, the plan also expands the United States' capability for lethal airstrikes, which has been responsible for more than 3,000 deaths since 2004. Up next, from Trump's Twitter tirades to Hillary's Snapchats on the campaign trail, social media platforms may be the real stars of the 2016 presidential race. The new ways politicians are reaching voters after the break. Plus, smart roads may soon be able to charge electric cars as they drive. We'll tell you about technology behind it. And as we head to break, we'll leave you with some footage of a 15-year-old drone combat pilot, Kyle Ettinger, dominating in a recent tournament with his drone, the Carbon Crasher. It is time now for the Daily Bite, one number that tells a whole lot, and today's number is $779 million. That's the amount of money the British government is committing over the next 5 years to construct roads that will wirelessly charge electric cars as they drive. The magnetic power technology will start rolling out this year, but will be restricted to test areas that are currently off limits to drivers. The cost, around $1.5 million a mile. Well, Donald Trump is still riding high after that first GOP debate. 24% of Republican voters are backing Trump in a new CNN poll, making him the front runner for the Republican presidential nomination. Trump is also beating competitors on social media. His late-night Twitter rants reached 3.8 million followers. Social media is no longer a supporting part of a political candidate's strategy. Tweets and Facebook posts are now becoming the strategy. Candidates are debating issues on Twitter and Instagramming photos from the campaign trail. Snapchat also playing a new role in the election with 9 candidates on the photo sharing platform. But will the social media frenzy actually help politicians reach voters? Crowdpac CEO Steve Hilton with me here in the studio for more. Crowdpac uses objective data to help voters identify which candidates align with their views, and we're going to get to that in a moment. And you have a long history in politics, especially British politics,
Exactly.
I should say. But social media has been ripping up the playbook. That's obvious. And then Donald Trump comes in and just explodes it all. I mean, how is Trump and social media changing this election?
Well, I think the interesting thing is actually how it's not changing things so far, because if you look at the way social media and other types of technology have really democratized other parts of our lives, whether that's our access to information or transportation or going on vacation, all these things have really been changed by technology, but politics actually hasn't. And in fact, you're seeing things going in the wrong direction. Fewer people participate in elections. More and more of the funding of campaigns is concentrated in fewer and fewer hands. And actually all the things that we want to see, more people voting, more people running for office, more people funding campaigns, that's all going backwards despite all this social media.
Interesting, not for lack of trying, right? You're seeing
exactly.
Candidates debate on Twitter.
Yes.
You know, Jeb and Hillary just throwing barbs at each other.
But it seems
Obviously,
to me that they're
Trump's
appealing
using
just
it.
to the same kind of narrow audience, the real kind of political junkies, and that's great. But if we really want a healthy democracy, we've got to get much, much wider participation, more people involved.
So how do they do that? Via social media? Is that
Well, it's not just
the
social
way
media.
to
I
do
mean,
it?
our approach at Crowdpac is to say, look, the starting point has got to be objective information about politics, because one of the things that our research shows is that people are really sick of all the spin and the BS and the things that candidates say, and they literally don't know who to trust.
Right.
They don't know where the candidates stand. They have no idea who to support. Unless you're a real dyed-in-the-wool partisan, you have no idea. And so our starting point is to give people simple, objective data based not on the opinions of candidates or even looking at their policies, but at what our research shows is the most powerful predictor of how they would behave in office, and that is who gives them money.
So I want to talk a little bit more about how Crowdpac works, because you can basically take an issue like guns. I care about guns, and you can rate your own stance on that issue on a scale from liberal to conservative, and then it'll show me several different candidates that actually have, you know, a dog in the fight when it comes to guns, and I can donate to their campaigns right
Yes,
away.
and remember,
is that the best way to get people to take action?
Well, there's many different ways that we're going to be trying out in this election season. So one of them is making it easier for people to find candidates that really match their priorities and then donate to their campaigns, because we believe that if we increase the number of small donors, then we can dilute the influence of the big money donors that have really dominated politics. But it's not just about giving money, it's also election time when it comes to voting. So many people tell us that at election time they literally have no idea who the candidates are on the long ballot, especially for really important political positions like statewide races, the state legislature, that actually determines a lot of the things that affect people's lives, local elections. People don't know the candidates, they don't know how to choose.
So this is about educating people.
It is about educating people about who's on their ballot and who they should support through data that's objective, but also really simple tools they can use on their cell phone, presented in a way that people are used to these days in other areas, applying that kind of great design and great UI to the area of politics, which is so far really untouched by that.
So how do you see the presidential election impacting you? I mean, this is going to be a very busy year for you guys.
Yes.
How do you see Crowdpac?
Well, I think what we've learned so far, we launched just under a year ago for the midterm elections last year, and we've been testing various things out, and the best response we've seen actually so far is when it comes to those local elections. So we did an experiment in Philadelphia this year. It's a year where you don't have many elections going on, but Philly was one of them, and we gave people information about everyone on their ballot, not just the mayor and the city council, but right down to local judges, offices that really had never been informed about in that way before. And we found great interest, particularly from young people. We found that nearly half of the people that used our election guide were actually under 34. So people say that young people are not interested in politics. Well, we found that if you give them the right data in a simple form that's cool and easy to use, they do get involved. Which
brings me to Snapchat. I know you've been talking to Snapchat about working more closely with Snapchat. What do you think is Snapchat's real role here? Because sometimes I think I'm too old for Snapchat already.
I definitely agree with you about that. As someone who
you
doesn't,
agree that I'm old?
No, I'm older than you, and I'm totally too old. In fact, I don't even have a cell phone.
Okay.
So
wow.
That is how out of touch I am with that.
But how important is Snapchat going?
I think, look, the thing with all these technologies in terms of reaching people is that I think that, of course, it's right, and you understand why candidates want to try to reach people in different ways, particularly younger people who have been put off by politics. But actually, in the end, I don't think it's about the method of reaching them. It's about the message of the candidates. It's about where they stand and whether they're offering something that people want. And so you can use all these new ways of reaching people. If they don't want what you're selling, then it won't make any difference. And that's why we come back to our approach at Crowdpac, which is the starting point is to give people simple, objective information that they can really believe. And that is the starting point for engagement.
All right, interesting. Well, we're going to check in with you as the election progresses, because I would love to see how that thinking evolves. Steve Hilton, CEO of Crowdpac, thanks so much for joining us today here on the show. Now, tomorrow on Bloomberg West, I'm going to be speaking with the co-founder of Kik, an instant messaging platform taking on a $50 million investment from Tencent, the company behind WeChat. That's tomorrow right here on Bloomberg West. That's it today from San Francisco.